I'm going to start with something that may make some of you a little uncomfortable, but hear me out. I recently posted a thread that said, in part, there is a growing trend of people who are looking for labels to opt out of the work required for healthy human engagement. Is it helpful to have language to name our experience? Yes. Is it helpful to prematurely self-diagnose or identify with labels that may not be fully understood or clinically applicable? No. It does real damage to people who live with these diagnoses, turning their reality into someone else's get out of jail free card. Explanation is not absolution. Over the last several years, we have made tremendous strides in normalizing conversations around mental health, trauma, neurodiversity, and psychological well-being. That is a great thing. Having language to describe our experience matters. Having frameworks to understand ourselves matters. Having access to diagnosis and treatment matters. But somewhere along the way, I think some of us have started to confuse diagnosis with definition. There's a difference between I have depression and I am depressed. There's a difference between I struggle with anxiety and this is who I am. But a diagnosis is information. It is not personhood. It is a framework that helps explain why you might be experiencing certain challenges or noticing certain patterns. What it is not is the entirety of your identity. Keep watching. Hi, I'm Dr. Shantae, and welcome to my YouTube channel. What I do here is reframe cultural narratives from a trauma-informed and sociological lens. So, let me address the elephant in the room. Between the video that I posted last week on literacy and the recording that I'm doing today, my subscribership doubled. I had kind of worked my way to 12,000 subscribers, and literally in a week, there's like 12, 13,000 more of you. So welcome. It is one thing to say, I like your content. It is something else to say, I trust your judgment. So the fact that you saw enough value to stick around means a lot. I don't always talk about literacy. Sometimes I talk about perimenopause. It's a mixed bag, but I'm happy to have you here nonetheless. So let's get into it. Please know that everything I'm about to say is being said from a place of compassion, is being said from the position of somebody who has a mental health diagnosis. Shout out to all my fellow CPTSDers. Hello. Okay, so this is not a judgment. This is not an indictment. What this is an opportunity to invite introspection and an opportunity to look differently at what we currently are seeing in the landscape of diagnosis and mental health challenges. And the first point I want to make is that a diagnosis is a lens. It is not an identity. Think of a diagnosis as a pair of glasses. The glasses help you see more clearly. They help you connect the dots. They help you understand why certain things may have been difficult. They help you identify what kind of support might be helpful. But the glasses are not your face. Likewise, a diagnosis is not your identity. A diagnosis is not the entirety of your personhood. A diagnosis is not who you are. A diagnosis is what you have or what you are struggling with. Because when we think about the entirety of our personhood, we are more than our traumas. We are more than our struggles. We are more than the challenges in front of us. And the purpose of a diagnosis is not to shrink your identity, but rather to increase your understanding. And what I am finding is that far too often, a lot of people are seeing diagnosis as a stopping point, as a veil, as a cloak, as a garment, a permanent garment from which to now navigate the rest of their lives and their existence. And a diagnosis is not intended to be that. A diagnosis helps you see the picture, but it is not the entire picture. Which brings me to point number 2. Explanation is not resignation, because what I am also seeing in the college that I'm teaching at and in public discourses and with some of my clients is this idea that, well, this is my diagnosis and this is how I am. So let it be written, so let it be done. And people are treating it like it's the zodiac sign. Like, well, I'm an Aries and this is how we get down. Or, well, I'm a Sagittarius and this is how I roll. And Again, while that framing might be helpful for understanding certain behaviors, certain characteristics, certain patterns, certain challenges, it is not who you are, okay? It is not the entirety of your personhood. But more than that, a diagnosis in many cases, not all, but in many cases is not a permanent life sentence. Some are chronic, some are situational, some are seasonal. For a lot of people, it isn't how you're always going to feel. And so when you receive a diagnosis, the question isn't, how do I let this define me? How do I now embody this new information that I've been given? The questions are, how do I live well despite this challenge? How do I engage and build healthy relationships despite this challenge? How do I communicate effectively even though I might have this limitation? How do I create a meaningful life despite this obstacle? And I see this a lot, especially with the clients that I work with who have experienced some sort of trauma. A lot of times, especially if it happens in childhood, a lot of times what happens is that in order to survive the situation that you are in, you will develop survival adaptations, okay? You will become smaller, or you will become a fixer, or you'll start people pleasing, or you'll start performing, or you'll start doing something in order to navigate the circumstances that you are in. And sometimes you can do that thing so long that it becomes what you think is your personality, when it really may not be your personality at all. Instead of it being who you are, it might be what you did to survive the circumstances you were in. But we adopt these as identities. I'm the fixer. I'm the lone wolf. I don't need anybody. I'm the solo act. I can't depend on people. Or this entire family would fall apart if it wasn't for me. Or I'll come to the rescue. Or you know what? Never mind. It doesn't matter what I want. You guys go ahead. I'll do something else. That's not who you are. That's what you're doing, in many cases, to navigate some very challenging circumstances. But it's not the end of the story. It's not the end of the line. It doesn't mean that it always has to be this way. A few years ago, I had occasion to do sabbatical research in Portugal, and I was researching Americans who had left the United States and immigrated to Portugal. And what I found in those interviews and in that research was that a lot of people who thought that they were depressed or anxious or hypervigilant or what have you found out that's who they were in the US under difficult circumstances and changing landscapes and complex political dynamics and hashtag Mike Brown and hashtag Breonna Taylor, that many of them felt like there was just this looming cloud of danger. But then when they relocated to another place, and it's not that this other place was paradise, and it's not that this other place was perfect, but being in a soil where they felt like they were not under constant threat of attack, being in a situation where they felt like their rights were not being diminished or taken away, being in a situation where they felt like they could walk down the street and not be in fear for their lives, all of a sudden it was like, oh, I don't struggle with anxiety in the same way. Or it's like, oh, I haven't had any depressive symptoms in a really long time, come to think of it. So for them, this particular group of research participants, it wasn't who they were, it's where they were and what they were dealing with at the time. Which brings me to point number 3. Insight is not growth. Okay, so understanding is not the same thing as transformation. Understanding is not the same thing as doing the work. And so a lot of people, when they receive some sort of diagnosis or framework or lens from which to process their experiences, a lot of them will stop at the diagnosis. They will stop at the ADHD. They will stop at attachment style. They will stop at their trauma history or CPTSD or what have you. But insight alone is not going to change your life. Insight alone is not going to move the needle forward in terms of how you continue to show up for yourself, in terms of how you have a life well lived despite having these challenges. Because you can understand why you did something and continue to do it. You can understand the origins of where this came from and still be stuck. And this is why I said in my original thread, I have seen too many people use diagnosis as a permission slip to do harm or as a permission slip to opt out of healthy human engagement. And for the record, you don't owe anybody anything, okay? Like you don't have to have community. You don't have to have friendship. You don't have to participate in your own family if that's not what you want to do. But that's different than saying, "Oh, well, if it hadn't been for my insert diagnosis, then I wouldn't have done this deplorable thing." And that's just what it is. Oh well, that's not how this works. Like explanation is not absolution. Explanation is not a permission slip to treat people a certain way. Explanation and understanding is not a hall pass. And I remember this came up recently at one, I think it was the BAFTA Awards, where Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo were presenting an award, and someone who had a diagnosis of, I believe it was Tourette's, just launched this racial epithet at them, this expletive, and there was two camps. Okay, one camp was, this is unacceptable regardless of your diagnosis. This does not excuse harm or behavior. And then there was another camp that was like, well, that's how this works and that's what it is, and you just got to roll with it and you just got to accept it. Explanation is not absolution. You are still responsible for your behavior. You are still responsible for your actions. You are still responsible for your choices in a lot of cases. Now, let's not get overly clinical, because there are always exceptions to the rule, okay? Because a lot of times what what happens in the comments is people get pedantic. Well, technically, according to, Article 3, Paragraph 2, that's not what this is. Okay, let's embrace the spirit of the conversation, let's rather than like the letter, because there are always going to be exceptions to the rule. At the same time, just because we have a frame of understanding what we've experienced, we still have some agency in deciding who we are and how we get to show up. And so just because we have understanding is not the same thing as growth. Understanding is not the same thing as progress. Understanding is not the same as the very unsexy granny panty work of putting one foot in front of the other and trying to make some semblance of a happy life despite facing tremendous challenges or significant hardships. And I say all of this from a place of compassion. I would not have added mental health to my work as a practitioner if I was not compassionate about these challenges, if I was not compassionate about equipping people with the language to describe their lives and their circumstances. At the same time, I am equally passionate about not allowing what you have to determine who you are. So insight is great, but that's not the end of the story. And another thing I want to caution against, since I have you on the line, is this idea of grabbing hold to popular phrases on the internet. And so as of today, as of this recording, neurodivergence is not a diagnosis out of the DSM. It actually comes from sociology. And I will put the link to describe the origins of neurodivergence, and people have nicknamed it neurospicy or what have you. And while you might see something on social media and think like, that sounds familiar, or that sounds like a pattern that I'm experiencing, there's also this trend to start prematurely self-diagnosing and diagnosing yourself, and it's like, oh, that's what I have. If I had known that years ago, then things would have been totally different. You might have that. That might be the correct framing for your experience, but I think it's really important to resist the urge to start self-naming and self-claiming without the support, without the accompaniment of a professional lens, because sometimes people go straight down rabbit holes and exploring diagnoses or pathologies that they don't even have. Okay, so there are lots of things that mirror one another, that seem similar to one another, but aren't exactly that particular thing. So I also want to encourage you to resist the urge to prematurely diagnose or self-diagnose or apply clinical labels to parts of your experience that really don't apply. So to wrap this up, I think that a lot of people tend to conflate explanation with designation. A map can tell you where you are, but it can also show you where to go next. A destination says, this is what it is, this is who I am, this is where it stops. But I think the challenge and the growth opportunity here is to not let any one label, any one diagnosis, any one pathology be the end all be all, to not allow that to be the identifier through which we are known. Because I'll be honest with you, do I have CPTSD? Yes. Is that what I want to be known for? No. I feel like I have so much more to offer. I feel like I have so many other tools in the toolbox and so many other gifts that have nothing to do with my diagnosis. And so, as human beings, we all have struggles. Some of us have more significant struggles than others. And while that struggle deserves compassion and support, it should never be the limit of who we can become. So, I hope you found this insightful and helpful. Thank you for stopping by. For those of you who are new here, for those of you who have been with me for the past few months, I hope that you will stick around. And if you do not, thank you for coming to visit, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.